but the inclusion comes down to like the everyday things that you have to do when you need to be considerate and think of all the other people that are in the room. So oftentimes women end up leaving the job because they don't feel like they are properly heard.
So JP, welcome to the IFA 2023 podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. How are you finding your trip to the event?
It's good, actually. It's my first time. When the opportunity was presented to me in regards to the topic that I was speaking on with the panel, I was excited to join it and be a part of it. But I have to admit, I did not know what IFA was. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure I knew where I was going to be speaking at that time. So to later learn about IFA and realize how large it is, it's been really cool. It's been really nice to learn about it.
Yeah, and its history. I don't know if you've checked out the history at all. You know, like Einstein was here back in the day. You know, it's a show that has a crazy heritage going all that way back in time.
Excellent. Now I have something to tell my kids today. Tell them that I was working with Einstein back in the day, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I have a few facts like that. Always good. Just wheel them out whenever you can.
Excellent.
I guess first, for people who don't know you, could you introduce yourself a bit, JP, and your background and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is JP Nacier, born and raised New York kid, now living in Berlin for the past 3 years. I've been working, operating, and investing in the tech and software development space for pretty much the past 20 years now. Currently operating as the CTO for Movinx, which is an insurtech startup based out of Berlin, but also working with capital allocators such as Caesar Ventures as a tech advisor in Berlin, as well as just all-around tech hobbyist for the most part.
And what do you see when you look at the makeup and the diversity levels of, leadership in the tech sphere?
That's a good question, because I think the first thing you have to look at is understanding the social stack. Mm-hmm. Right. So I have the viewpoint of both being in the U.S. and New York in particular, and then now being in Berlin in Germany. And so diversity looks different depending on the market that you're in, and there's different targets in the different ways that it's kind of addressed. I would say from a representation of nationalities and ethnicities and religions, for example, from what I've seen in Berlin, at least in the tech startup standpoint, it's actually quite varied. It's actually impressively varied. Many companies, I think even those like Movinx, my own, I think we tout somewhere in the vicinity of like 17 or 20 representative nations in the country, which is actually, in the company, which is actually quite impressive. I can't say that in the States I would have that same level of diversity at a startup, for example, in that regards. So the way that I've seen the topic is a little bit different in that regards, because I see that the diversity hurdle is not necessarily the biggest challenge. I really have always focused more on the inclusion and equitability part. So there have been times when, for example, if we look at from a gender standpoint, in particular, if we're talking about women inclusion in tech startups, that area is still pretty low. When we look at it there. So if we look at it from a organization as a whole, my company is actually doing quite well. Right? Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. I was just thinking back to the earlier point you said at the difference between the US and Europe, and especially the makeup of startup founders being like quite radically different in terms of, ethnicities, race, nationalities. Why do you think there is that divide between Germany and the US?
Actually, that's a great question. That's something that I've been trying to figure out and understand myself. I like to speak to the States. Predominantly, a lot of the startup founders, especially those that get the capital allocation, generally have a close tie to some kind of academic institution. Mm-hmm. So Stanford, Yale, MIT, Harvard, BU, NYU, so on and so forth. And that also tracks with where the I could say alma maters of the institutions themselves. So, those being predominantly more white male, there's a natural tendency for that capital to flow in that direction. And when you see diversity in the executive position or in the founder's seat, it's generally going to be East Asian or South Asian. I would say South Asian and East Asian. And again, that follows the same thing from an academic standpoint. So that's how I have noticed the correlation. But that doesn't mean that the whole market is like that. But when you look at it from a prominent standpoint, that's what I see over there. So in that same vein, it's difficult for me to be able to identify what it is from a Berlin standpoint, because that part I have not really been able to delve too deep into.
And at the end of your previous point, you were mentioning the kind of the gender balance when it comes to startups. And is that something you see globally or in all your experience, just a very male dominated environment?
Yeah, that's actually been very consistent, actually, across all the markets that I've seen. I think one of the challenges is that we're in a time where tech is exploding more and more and more, right? Across every single market. But the access for women in tech hasn't always been in a way where it invites them in, right? So you can't necessarily just leave the door open and say come in and and expect people to just be able to walk through the door, right? They need to kind of know what's there on the other side and actually be invited in a little bit more. So we have started to do more of that effort, but one of the challenges in particular for startups, and I've operated with a lot of startups, is that you need a really really dense concentration of really skilled talent to be able to get the returns that you're looking for from an early stage company. And when you have so many women that are just entering the market, like within, let's say, the last 5 or to even 10 years, right? But if you look at that 5-year timeline, they're just entering the market from a tech standpoint. There's unfortunately not a density of highly skilled software engineers, for example, that are women that can contribute to the same level when you're looking at the same proportion to men. And that also makes it very, very challenging for them to be able to get into that market effectively. And then sadly, once you do attract them, the other challenge is keeping them. Right. And this is where the inclusion topic is really the one that's the most impactful rather than just a diversity topic. Right. Because you can just put a sign up that says that, yeah, come on, everybody come in. We want everybody. That's fine. Right. You can put a billboard on it. Great. But the inclusion comes down to like the everyday things that you have to do when you need to be considerate and think of all the other people that are in the room. So oftentimes women end up leaving the job because they don't feel like they are properly heard or they're properly, I wouldn't say catered to, but understood within the same within the same environments that they're actually there.
So then how do you foster how do you foster an environment of inclusion? What do you have to do to make that? Is it societal? Is it personal? Is it like training? What are the different elements you have to push? Because obviously it seems that there's from what you're saying and what I've been reading, there's been a big push to bring, say, more women into technological roles, and there are lots more pathways open there for that. But like you said, if there's not an inclusion system set up, then they're not going to stay.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to touch on the societal part because I think that's a bit too macro. So to take it from my own experiences, it kind of starts with like the first point of contact, right? So I recognized a long time ago, to me about 7 or 8 years ago, 7 years ago, I'd say, that even the way that we structured our job descriptions when we're hiring were very, very geared towards men. Right. So men have a tendency to be very, very direct and want things in bullet point and short form. And then due to our overconfidence as men, you can create a list of 10 things. They can do one. They're like, great, I can get that job. Right. Where I find in contrast with many women, it's like if they don't have all 10 capabilities written down exactly as they're written, they are not going to apply. Right. I can't change that particular piece, but what I can change, and what I did change, was changing the way that I actually drafted the job description. So that way it was more of a story in regards to the type of work that you're going to do and the challenges that you would be picking up, as opposed to a hard list of you have to do this, you can't do this, you need 3 years of this or 5 years that. And in many cases, actually remove numbers completely from like you have 3 years of experience, 5 years experience. I always find that it's a poor leading indicator anyway. And just focus more on can you do this type of work? Can you take this type of challenge up? And that has had a significant difference in terms of how many women actually apply for those jobs. So that's just an example.
Yeah.
So you really have to kind of make it part of your everyday and consider it in everything that you're doing. The times that you put your meetings, the flexibility of your hours, depending on if you're dealing with now, mothers and fathers also can take as much time as they need, but traditionally mothers have a tendency to take more time off and need more flexibility than fathers would, when they're raising their children. So how flexible can you make the work hours, and how do you accustom, like, for example, the beating so that it's adaptive and adjusts to everyone? It's things like that. So it's just really in the everyday little things. You just have to really be conscious of it. Also, in terms of just speaking in a meeting, right? Oftentimes, sometimes you will get you'll have the louder people in the room, but you also have to, as a leader, if you have to recognize that sometimes you need to make the louder person just quiet down a little bit, right, and invite the other people to move forward and let them be able to speak. Again, I find many times it's often the women that are a little bit more quiet because they feel the pressure to have to be right with what they're saying, where they realize they can just ask a question like everybody else. And sometimes I'll have to lead by example, and I'll purposely just say things that sound off, right? Because I want them to understand that it's like, yeah, I'm also not perfect as well. It's okay. I can be corrected even in the middle of this meeting. It's fine. We can all just have a nice, respectful dialogue. It's fine.
So it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is kind of encouraging a mindfulness or self-reflection when it comes to business, especially when making those decisions.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So in that situation, how do you encourage that, especially in a startup-like environment that is so fast-paced and there's so much pressure coming on? Do you have any tips or guides of, how, if you're thinking about, like, say, a early 30s, late 20s kind of white male founder, which is probably the large makeup of those companies, what sort of tips or methods can they take on board in order to become a more reflective, thoughtful leader that then creates a more inclusive environment by being more mindful of the people around them?
Okay. I would say the weak part of my answer is first you have to actually make a commitment to want to do it. Right. You have to be mindful of that.
That's the first step of AA, right?
Yeah, exactly. So once you're there, I think the thing is that you're not going to recognize everything immediately. It's going to take some time. You need to instill a culture of open feedback, open and transparent feedback. As much candor, respectful candor as you can is going to be a big deal. Because one of the things that I notice that we kind of take for granted in general, just as people, is talking, right? Is communicating. It's like everybody wants to be heard, everybody wants to speak, but no one really wants to kind of listen and understand. So your first step really is making a culture where communication and feedback are absolutely critical to everything that you do. How you communicate, how you express yourself is important. I always tell in particular my engineers, which traditionally were not known to be the most loquacious people.
Nice use of the word loquacious as well in that situation.
Yeah, I did that on purpose. So in that regards, I always tell them it's like, okay, a lot of times from a technical standpoint, you're like way up here, right? And everybody else is like down here. So you can't go into the room speaking to them here because they're not going to understand you. It's like you have to often bring your way of speaking down to the person that knows the least in the room. Understand the audience that you're speaking with. So for me, that's actually been one of the foundational things of being is that you have to learn to check yourself and how you're speaking to people, right? So that way you can also get them to give you the feedback and listen to what they're saying. And once you start doing that in a more fluid manner, then you can start to understand and see the difference between, okay, what are these guys saying versus what these women are saying, or what are these people from this country saying versus what people of this country. And you start to notice like the overlaps, but also the distance of where things are misunderstood. And then that's how you can actually start to correct it.
JP, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Kellen.
Yeah, no worries. It was a pleasure speaking with you. And yeah, I hope everyone listening takes on board some of those tips because, at the end of the day, we can all be better people.
Agreed. Thanks so much.
Cheers.